Welcome to True Crime Threads, where we unravel the darkest secrets behind real-life crimes. In today's story, a fake marriage turns into a chilling murder mystery on Canadian soil. In 2019, 24-year-old Rowan Malhotra arrived in Toronto from India with dreams of building a better future. Like many international students, he took up part-time jobs, shared a tiny apartment, and enrolled in a community college. But beneath his hard-working exterior was a desperate mission, securing permanent residency in Canada by any means. He was ambitious, but time wasn't on his side. His study permit was temporary, and the cost of extending his stay legally was rising fast. Within months, Rowan began hearing about a growing trend among international students: marriage for immigration deals. It was risky, but the rewards were too tempting: a legal pathway to stay in Canada, work full-time, and eventually apply for permanent residency. For many, it was the only way to escape the constant pressure of expiring permits and financial stress. Rowan started making discreet inquiries in student WhatsApp groups and community forums. That's when someone introduced him to a woman named Jessica Fraser. Jessica was 29, a Canadian citizen living in a quiet Toronto suburb. She had been involved in such arrangements before, never officially, but through whispered networks. She understood how it worked: legal on paper, transactional in reality. Jessica asked for $25,000, split across 6 months. Rowan hesitated at first, but desperation won. He agreed, using borrowed money for the initial payment. A few photos, joint bank accounts, and staged social media posts later, their paperwork was submitted. To outsiders, they were newlyweds. Behind the scenes, it was a carefully timed performance. Rowan played his role convincingly. He posed in couple selfies, joined Jessica for occasional outings, and even memorized personal details for immigration interviews. He moved into her apartment briefly to make the marriage appear authentic, but spent most of his time away, juggling classes and side jobs. Everything seemed to be going well, and for a few months, the plan held steady. They were cautious, avoided attention, and stuck to the schedule they had agreed on. But trouble began when Rowan started missing payments. He blamed late paychecks, family emergencies, and unexpected bills. Jessica, who was counting on the money to cover her own debts, began pressuring him. She sent reminders, warned him about deadlines, and reminded him that a breach of their agreement could lead to serious consequences. But Rowan was trapped. He couldn't afford to lose his chance at permanent residency, and he couldn't afford to pay her. He thought he could stall her, buy time, and find another way to settle things. What he didn't realize was that Jessica wasn't bluffing. Behind the scenes, she started collecting evidence: screenshots of messages, transaction records, even secretly recorded calls. She was preparing to protect herself if things went south. Meanwhile, Rowan, unaware of the growing threat, had started seeing someone else, a fellow student named Anaya. She didn't know about the fake marriage. For Rowan, Anaya was a welcome distraction from his stressful situation, but his world was becoming increasingly unstable. With each passing week, the stakes rose higher. One side wanted her money, the other wanted his freedom. Both were playing a dangerous game. What had started as a calculated deal was now turning personal, and beneath the surface, tensions were slowly building. Neither of them knew it yet, but they were heading toward a point of no return. And when the truth finally surfaced, it wouldn't just end the agreement, it would end a life. At first, everything went according to plan. The documents were submitted, the photos looked convincing, and the story they had rehearsed for immigration interviews appeared airtight. Rowan and Jessica played their roles with precision. They attended scheduled appointments, responded to inquiries, and carefully maintained the illusion online. For those watching from the outside, they seemed like a quiet, young couple adjusting to married life. But beneath that surface, cracks were forming. Rowan had agreed to pay Jessica $25,000 over a period of 6 months. He made the first two payments on time, using money borrowed from friends and short-term freelance work. But as months passed, the financial pressure intensified. His part-time wages couldn't cover his tuition, rent, daily expenses, and the ongoing installments. He tried picking up extra shifts and odd jobs, but still came up short. He started delaying payments, making excuses, and promising to catch up soon. Jessica, who was relying on the money to cover credit card debt and unpaid bills, quickly grew impatient. She began sending messages more frequently, reminding him of the agreement. When polite reminders didn't work, she started hinting at consequences. Rowan, already overwhelmed with coursework and financial stress, felt trapped. He feared Jessica might report him to immigration authorities. If he didn't pay, that would mean losing his legal status and possibly being deported. He tried reasoning with her, asking for more time, but the tension kept rising. Jessica wasn't interested in excuses, she wanted her money. Feeling increasingly cornered, Rowan started searching for a way out. He thought of breaking off the arrangement and finding another partner willing to go through a similar process. But starting over wasn't an option. The immigration process was already in motion, and undoing it could raise red flags. Instead, he began entertaining the idea of manipulating the situation, looking for a way to make Jessica back off without putting his status at risk. At the same time, he had begun seeing another student named Anaya. She was in the same college, shared his language, and knew nothing about his marriage. Anaya became his escape from the stress. They met often, studied together, and grew close. Rowan didn't tell her about Jessica, afraid she might walk away if she knew the truth. He led her to believe he was single, focused, and building a future in Canada. For a brief moment, Rowan felt he could live to listen with Anaya, full of promise, and one with Jessica, fading into the background. But he underestimated Jessica's resolve. Unbeknownst to him, Jessica had already begun documenting everything. She saved every bank transfer, every conversation, and even took covert photos when Rowan visited. She was preparing to approach an immigration lawyer. Her plan was to expose the fake marriage, present her evidence, and position herself as a victim of fraud. She believed doing so would shield her from legal consequences while punishing Rowan for breaching their deal. Rowan sensed that Jessica was no longer bluffing. Her tone had changed, and her messages grew sharper. He tried to delay again, but the tension between them had shifted. Jessica was no longer just a partner in a transaction, she had become a threat. And while he searched for a way to regain control, the balance of power was already slipping away from him. The situation was spiraling, and neither of them realized how dangerously close they were to crossing a line that couldn't be undone. One afternoon, Jessica suddenly went silent. Her social media posts stopped, her phone went unanswered, and she failed to show up for work. For someone who kept a consistent digital presence, the sudden disappearance raised concern. Friends messaged her, expecting an update or explanation, but received nothing. After 3 days, one of her close friends reported her missing. Police were called to her apartment in Midtown Toronto. The door was locked from the inside, and the mailbox was overflowing. When officers entered using a management key, the interior seemed untouched. There were no signs of struggle, broken items, or forced entry. Her purse and phone were missing, but her coat and shoes were still there. At first, investigators treated it as a standard missing person case. But as days turned into weeks, the lack of communication or transactions from Jessica's bank account made it more alarming. Detectives began retracing her last known movements. Security footage from nearby stores showed her shopping alone 2 days before she vanished. After that, there were no digital footprints or calls, messages, or card use. Police contacted those closest to her, including Rowan. He claimed he hadn't seen her recently and was just as shocked by the news. Rowan told police that they had grown distant and were living separately. He explained the marriage as complicated but legal. Investigators asked routine questions and noted his calm demeanor. Nothing directly connected him to her disappearance, and there were no signs of violence. But the story didn't sit well with detectives. They quietly placed him under surveillance, hoping to catch inconsistencies in his behavior. Meanwhile, Rowan tried to carry on with life. He continued attending college, working part-time, and spending time with Anaya. He kept his anxiety hidden, but inside, he was unraveling. He knew Jessica had been threatening to expose everything. Her sudden disappearance gave him momentary relief, but it also scared him. He didn't know if someone else was involved, or if Jessica had staged something to frame him. 3 weeks after Jessica went missing, a group of hikers discovered a body near a partially frozen lake, about 40 kilometers north of Toronto. It was a female wrapped in a tarp, with hands bound and signs of blunt force trauma. Dental records confirmed the body was Jessica's. The missing person case instantly turned into a homicide investigation. News of the discovery spread quickly. Police immediately revisited everyone connected to Jessica, this time with more urgency. Rowan was questioned again, but he remained composed. He denied involvement, provided alibis, and allowed a search of his apartment. Nothing incriminating was found. Still, police found it hard to dismiss the fact that he had both motive and opportunity. A witness came forward claiming they had seen someone resembling Rowan in a water near the lake area days before the body was found, but it was too vague to hold up in court. Then came a break. Surveillance footage from a hardware store showed Rowan purchasing duct tape, glove, and a tarp 2 weeks before Jessica disappeared. He explained the items were for moving furniture for a friend. Without physical evidence or a clear timeline, police couldn't arrest him, but their suspicion deepened. They decided to continue monitoring him closely, knowing that eventually he might make a mistake. What they didn't expect was for him to vanish next. With Jessica's murder confirmed, police launched a full homicide investigation. The case had quickly shifted from a routine missing person report to something far more complex. Detectives focused their attention on Rowan, who had both a documented relationship with Jessica and a clear motive. Although there was no direct evidence tying him to the crime, his actions before and after Jessica's disappearance raised concern. His purchase of duct tape, glove, and a tarp from a hardware store just 2 weeks before she vanished was suspicious, and though he claimed it was for moving furniture, investigators weren't convinced. They dug deeper into his background, interviewing classmates, employers, and neighbors. While most described him as quiet and hardworking, others mentioned that he had recently seemed distracted and tense. No one had seen him with Jessica in the weeks before her death, but several recalled seeing him with another woman, Anaya, often around campus. Anaya became the next key person of interest. When contacted by detectives, Anaya was cooperative but shocked. She had no idea that Rowan was married. She had believed he was single, and their relationship had grown serious over the past few months. When shown photos of Rowan with Jessica from social media, she was stunned into silence. After gathering herself, she agreed to let investigators search her messages with him. The digital evidence painted a picture of Rowan's increasing desperation. His conversations with Anaya were affectionate, but interspersed with subtle signs of stress, vague mentions of people causing him problems, financial pressure, and the need to clear obstacles from his life. Investigators noted that these statements aligned closely with the timeline of Jessica's threats to expose their fake marriage. Anaya's phone also contained voice messages, some of which hinted at a growing fear that someone might try to ruin what he had worked for. Still, there was no DNA, no fingerprints, and no murder weapon. The crime scene at the lake offered little to work with. The cold weather and weeks-long exposure had erased most forensic clues. With no solid evidence to arrest Rowan, police continued monitoring him in the hope that he might slip. But before they could act, he vanished. One morning, a classmate reported that Rowan hadn't shown up to school in days. His landlord said the rent hadn't been paid, and his apartment was found locked. With no sign of recent activity, his bank account had been emptied, and his cell phone disconnected. There was no record of him booking a flight, train, or bus. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. For 2 months, investigators hit dead ends. Then, unexpectedly, an anonymous email was sent to the lead detective. It contained a GPS coordinate with no message other than the line, "You're looking in the wrong direction." When officers arrived at the location, they found a rented storage unit registered under a fake name. Inside were shelves of personal belongings, electronic equipment, and several notebooks. What disturbed them most was a set of files labeled Jessica Fraser Evidence. Among them were printed emails, screenshots, and a hidden hard drive. It was a digital archive of Jessica's financial activities, private messages, and personal contacts, but the hard drive also contained something else, of video files from another man, and what he confessed would shift the entire case into unexpected territory. Following the coordinates, police uncovered a rented storage unit registered under a false identity. Inside, they discovered a disturbing collection of documents, surveillance photos, and labeled folders. The room had clearly been organized with intent. Nothing was random. Along one wall were printouts of Jessica's text conversations, screenshots of bank transfers, and detailed notes about her previous interactions with other international students. It became clear that Jessica had been involved in similar marriage for citizenship arrangements before Rowan, and this wasn't her first time leveraging her position for financial gain. In a locked box, detectives found a hard drive labeled only with the date July 10. When examined, the drive contained a series of encrypted folders. Once unlocked, they revealed video files that had been recorded by another man, Amir Sheikh. Amir had been a student in Canada 5 years earlier, and his name had never come up in any part of Jessica's missing person or homicide case. His confession, however, exposed an entirely new layer to the story. In the videos, Amir spoke calmly, but with a visible sense of defeat. He described his experience with Jessica, how he had met her through a friend, paid her to marry him under the same type of agreement, and how things fell apart when he couldn't complete the full payment. According to Amir, Jessica had reported him to immigration authorities, framing him as a scammer. He lost his legal status and was deported to India within months. The video ended with him saying he had returned to Canada under a false name, and that someone else would finish what he had once thought about doing himself. The confession changed the direction of the case entirely. Police began to question whether Rowan had truly orchestrated Jessica's murder, or if he had become entangled in a much deeper revenge plot. Investigators reviewed flight logs, order activity, and visa records, but found no trace of Amir re-entering the country legally. However, there were several unverified sightings of a man matching his description in Toronto during the same period Jessica went missing. With Rowan still missing, police considered multiple scenarios. Had Amir carried out the murder himself and framed Rowan by leaving behind the hardware store, footage, and other circumstantial clues? Or had he convinced Rowan to act under pressure? Knowing his desperation, the motive was no longer isolated to one failed marriage. It appeared that Jessica's past had caught up with her. What once looked like a clean-cut case of immigration fraud and betrayal had grown into a web of resentment, manipulation, and long-held grudges. Despite extensive efforts, neither Rowan nor Amir was located. Anonymous tips continued to come in, but none led to arrests. The files in the storage unit raised more questions than answers. The presence of personal items belonging to Jessica suggested someone had been watching her closely for weeks, if not months. Whether Rowan was an accomplice, a victim, or the true perpetrator remained unclear. The case was left open, with investigators admitting that the full truth might never be known. What started as a fake marriage meant to secure a future had ended in a murder fueled by layers of deception, secrets, and vengeance. And the most haunting part of all was that two men vanished unaccused, the other confessing, and neither was ever seen again.